4 babies after it. I've worked 12 straight days and I don't know how many hours, and I am extremely tired tonight, and I feel okay, I'm just tired. Thank you so much. I feel like I can go on now. I thought you thought I was kidding. Well, I knew Jenny down there would lead the cheers. I don't have any preconceived notions about what I'm going to do tonight. It's taken me a long time, but I finally thinned the crowd down. I think I got them with the 11th step. There's a couple things we can do, and it's up to you. We can read 12 and 12 tonight, and step 12 and 12 and 12, and then read chapter 7 next week. Or we can skip the 12 and 12 and read the big book tonight and call it quits. What do you want to do?
Read the 12 and 12 and read the other one.
How many people want to read both of them? How many people don't care? Well, I should have known better than to use democratic process in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now I'm more confused than when I started. I didn't think I could read 19 pages tonight and here. That's why I wanted to skip it. I don't know, maybe we'll read this tonight, read the 12 and 12 tonight, and read the big book next week. There's a lot of important things in both of them, and maybe I can struggle through it. I want to talk about the 12th step a little bit before we get started. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, not as a result of these steps, but as the result of these steps. And there's a big difference. If you don't understand the difference, look up the 2 words in the dictionary. We tried to carry this message to the alcoholic and to practice these principles in all our affairs. A spiritual awakening, which I have had after I have worked to the best of my ability with a sponsor the first 11 steps, is this profound personality change that Bill talks about in Appendix 2, the psychic change that Dr. Silkworth talks about in the doctor's opinion. It all means the same thing, but what it means to me is that I have awakened spiritually. When I go to sleep at night, I am not aware. When I awaken in the morning, I am aware. When I awaken spiritually, then I awaken to the spiritual nature that I have because I'm a human being, and to the spiritual significance of the things that happen to me in my life. This awakening puts me in a position to have spiritual experiences. I know it's kind of a play on words, but it's just the way I look at it. Nothing has really happened to me by having this spiritual awakening. What I have been able to do is to embark upon a new life, to see a new life, see my life in a new perspective, in a new light, and with a new meaning, with a new awareness of who and what I am and how I fit in. So as I tried to carry this message to the alcoholic, that gives me a purpose in my life, something I have never had before, not a purpose that was firm and unyielding, My purpose was whatever I woke up in the morning and decided it was, or whatever somebody else told me it was. I now have a purpose in my life, which is to carry this message of hope to the alcoholic, whether he's still drinking or he's sober, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. I now have a code of conduct. I now have some principles by which I'm going to try and live my life, something I never had. My principles were always dictated to me by seen and unseen forces, both from inside of me and from outside of me. So I've got some things in my life now that somewhere along the line I missed out on. God made me, He made me a defective person. Not defective in His eyes, but defective from the standpoint that I wasn't able to function in society, whether I was drunk or whether I was sober. Through these 12 steps, or the first 11 steps, followed by the 12th step, I've been able to repair this seeming defect, this thing that the world sees as a defect, and get along with myself and other people and have a right dependence on a God of my understanding. Part of the spiritual awakening is I have to realize where it came from. And although it came from God, it came to me through this fellowship. This was the conduit through which I received. And this was here when I walked in. All I had to do was to walk in and sit down. So I had to stop looking at Alcoholics Anonymous like I looked at a bar. I believe I'll go to the bar tonight. Go in and sit down, and they raise the price of Budweiser a nickel a bottle. I'll say, I'll see you, I'm going down here. I won't be back up here anymore. I have to take some responsibility for this fellowship. Because the people that came before me made sure it was here so I could come in and sit down. When we get to the 12 and 12, or the big book, you will see that in the instructions in chapter 7, Working with Others, is how the man all alone that got this book in the mail was supposed to go out and start his own fellowship. If I had been faced with the prospect of starting my own fellowship in order to save my life one day at a time, I wouldn't be among you. Because this was here, I am. So it requires a sense of responsibility on my part to do what I can to keep us and this and me healthy. Because I believe that the only reason that God chose me to stay sober was so another alcoholic could. So I am responsible to help other people. And I think, if I can editorialize a little bit, I think one of the greatest weaknesses in the program, or in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, is the lack of sponsorship. You know, some people are in a position to do more sponsorship than others, and some people are vice versa, who can't do much. I've been in a position, fortunately, throughout most of my recovery, where I had a lot of time to devote to other people. God's put some other circumstances in my life now, and I don't have as much time as I used to. I have sponsored as many as 14 or 15 people at one time. And that's not to say that it didn't require sacrifice. It required a great deal of sacrifice. It required an understanding wife. It required a lot of things of me and other people in order to do that. My circumstances have changed, and I can't sponsor that heavily anymore. But God picks and chooses where I go. You know, I just do what's in front of me. When I had the time, He put the people in my life. But someone had helped me to prepare to have those people come into my life. And even though I don't sponsor as much as I used to, I still have the basis of all that work that I've done with other people. And what I've been sharing with you in this series of meetings on the 12 steps is basically what I have learned by helping myself learn these 12 steps, by helping another person learn these 12 steps. And I feel a great lack that I don't have as much contact on the grassroots level anymore. But, you know, I had a lot of trouble with employment for a number of years. And even after I got sober, I had a hard time making any money. And I didn't know why. You know, I knew what I was capable of doing. I knew what I was willing to do. And still, my opportunities seemed limited. There came a situation in my life where I needed some income. And the need was filled. So I work a hell of a lot more than I used to, which is why I had to reduce my sponsorship load. But I feel the lack of it. I really do. I miss it a great deal. Nothing has ever taught me as much as helping another human being. Nothing has ever kept me on as even a keel as helping another human being. And, you know, the fellowship has always been driven by the younger people in the program, the younger people in sobriety, people with less than 5 years sober generally tend to run things in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the people with more than that kind of become the elder statesmen, and they go to the back of the room and let the younger people make the mistakes and make sure nothing gets torn up beyond repair. And that's the way it has always been, and Bill talks about that in the steps, about the elder statesmen and bleeding deacons. But I don't like to see people that have a message to carry not carrying it. You know, and we're all carrying a message being in this meeting tonight. Every meeting we go to, we're carrying a message. But you save people's lives by teaching them eyebrow to eyebrow. The meetings are merely gatherings of the fellowship. They're not really to teach and to learn how to practice. We get strength from each other here. The learning has to take place one-on-one. And I don't see as much of that as I saw a number of years ago. And I don't see the willingness of people to make the sacrifice to do it. You know, this has never been, this isn't free. It isn't free to me, and it isn't free to everybody, anybody. It doesn't fall out of the sky. just because I decided to get sober and to be a good person. It requires work. And the willingness to sacrifice for other people is a true expression of love. And we're going to talk about that next week. I'm going to get back down off of the soapbox, and we're going to start reading into 12 and 12. On page 106, what happened? Yeah, I heard you. Oh. The joy of living is the theme of AA's 12th step, and action is its key word. So it says if you want to take some action, you can experience this thing called joy of living. Here we turn outward toward our fellow alcoholics who are still in distress. Here we experience the kind of giving that asks no rewards. Here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. And emotional sobriety is the removing of the attitudes of the drunk from the sober person. And the opposite of the attitudes of a drunk is one attitude, and that is gratitude. When I don't have gratitude, I think and act just like a drunk. When the 12th step is seen in its full implication, it is not really talking about the kind of love that has no price tag on it. I'm sorry, I put a word in there. It is really talking about the kind of love that has no price tag on it. Our 12th step also says that as a result of practicing all the steps, we have each found something called a spiritual awakening. To new AAs, this often seems like a very dubious and improbable state of affairs. What do you mean when you talk about a spiritual awakening, they ask. Maybe there are as many definitions of spiritual awakening as there are people who have had them, but certainly each genuine one has something in common with all the others, and these things which they have in common are not too hard to understand. When a man or woman has a spiritual awakening, the most important meaning of it is that he is now able to do, feel, and believe what he could not do before on his unaided strength and resources alone. That comes from step 2 in this book. He has been granted a gift which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. He has been set on a path which tells him he is really going somewhere, that life is not a dead end, not something to be endured or mastered. In a very real sense, he has been transformed because he has laid hold of a source of strength which in one way or another he had hereto denied himself. He finds himself in possession of a degree of honesty, tolerance, unselfishness, peace of mind, and love of which he had thought himself quite incapable. What he has received is a free gift, and yet usually, at least in some small part, he has made himself ready to receive it. And it says over and over in these books that I have to pay a price. It's not free. The free gift comes by preparing myself to receive it, and that's the price. The preparation is the price. And if you'll remember a long time ago, we read in chapter 4, We Agnostics, about the power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction that seems to come. That's what this paragraph is talking about. Bill's reiterating that with a lot more words. It's power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction that comes into my life. AA's manner of making ready to receive this gift lies in the practice of the 12 steps in our program. So let's consider briefly what we have been trying to do up to this point. And Bill just lost his absolute mind here. He wrote a paragraph that was a page and a half long, and he recapitulates all of the steps, and you can read it if you want. We're going to skip over to top of page 109. That doesn't mean that it's not worth reading, but I got to cut something out. So he's been talking about the first 11 steps in that first paragraph. So practicing these steps, we had a spiritual awakening about which finally there was no question. Looking at those who were only beginning and still doubted themselves, the rest of us were able to see the change setting in. From great numbers of such experiences, we could predict that the doubter who still claimed he hadn't gotten the spiritual angle, who still considered his well-loved AA group the higher power, would presently love God and call him by name. And that's repeated from another step. Now, what about the rest of the 12th step? The wonderful energy it releases and the eager action by which it carries our message to the next suffering alcoholic, and which finally translates the 12 steps into action upon all our affairs is the payoff. The magnificent reality of Alcoholics Anonymous. Even the newest of newcomers finds undreamed rewards as he tries to help his brother alcoholic, the one who is even blinder than he. This is indeed the kind of giving that actually demands nothing. He does not expect his brother's suffering to pay him or even to love him. And then he discovers that by the divine paradox of this kind of giving, he has found his own reward, whether his brother has yet received anything or not. His own character may still be gravely defective, but he somehow knows that God has enabled him to make a mighty beginning, and he senses that he stands at the edge of new mysteries, joys, and experiences of which he had never even dreamed. Practically every AA member declares that no satisfaction has been deeper and no joy greater than in a 12-step job well done. And I'd like to add, in a 12-step job not well done. I don't know how you do a 12-step job, well or bad. I never know what to say. You never know what's going to work. You think the most beautiful argument against the most slobbery drunk is just going to straighten him right up. And there is no right or wrong thing to do on a 12-step call that I've been able to determine. I even bought a guy something to drink on a 12-step call. You know, I don't know whether it turned out to be right or wrong thing or not. The Salvation Army came and got him, so at least he got some help. To watch the eyes of men and women open with wonder as they move from darkness into light, to see their lives quickly filled with new purpose and meaning, to see whole families reassembled, to see the alcoholic outcast received back into his community in full citizenship, and above all, to watch these people awaken to the presence of a loving God in their lives. These things are the substance of what we receive as we carry AA's message to the next alcoholic. And once you have experienced these things in your own life, and you are able to help another human being experience them, it's really a gratifying experience, one that you can be extremely grateful for, because every time that happens, my purpose has been fulfilled once again. Nor is this the only kind of 12-step work. We sit in AA meetings and listen, not only to receive something ourselves, but to give the reassurance and support which our presence can bring. If our turn comes to speak at a meeting, we again try to carry AA's message. Whether our audience is one or many, it is still 12-step work. There are many opportunities even for those of us who feel unable to speak at meetings or who are so situated that we cannot do much face-to-face 12-step work. We can be the ones who take on the unspectacular but important tasks that make good 12-step work possible, perhaps arranging for the coffee and cake after the meeting where so many skeptical, suspicious newcomers had found confidence and comfort in the laughter and talk. This is 12-step work in the very best sense of the word. Freely have you received, freely give is the core of this part of step 12. So, 12-step work is not only working with another alcoholic, it's also exercising my responsibility within the fellowship to keep it healthy. And there's many, many ways to do that. Being present at meetings is one. Making the coffee, cleaning up, being an IR, being a GSR, serving on committees, being a member of a home group, being on 12-step lists, being a phone volunteer, whatever contributes is 12-step work. And I'm responsible to contribute in any way I can. We may often pass through 12-step experiences where we will seem to be temporarily off the beam. These will appear as big setbacks at the time, but will be seen later as stepping stones to better things. For example, we may set our hearts on getting a particular person sobered up, and after doing all we can for months, we see him relapse. Perhaps this will happen in a succession of cases, and we may be deeply discouraged as to our ability to carry AA's message. Or we may encounter the reverse situation in which we are highly elated because we seem to have been successful. Here the temptation is to become rather possessive of these newcomers. Perhaps we try to give them advice about our affairs which we aren't really competent to give or not give at all. Then we are hurt and confused when the advice is rejected or when it is accepted and brings still greater confusion. By a great deal of ardent 12-step work, we sometimes carry the message to so many alcoholics that they place us in a position of trust. They make us, let us say, the group's chairman. Here again, we are presented with the temptation to overmanage things, and sometimes this results in rebuffs and other consequences which are hard to take. So, in order to do any kind of 12-step work, I have to always be on guard that I have the proper degree of humility with which to do the work properly. And it says that just because someone asks me to sponsor them doesn't mean that I have taken complete responsibility for their lives. They're still free human beings who do as they choose. And it talks about in the big book about laying a simple kit of spiritual tools at their feet and stepping back. I do not try to manage people's lives that I sponsor. I talk to them about options. I talk to them about possible consequences of each option. And then I ask them, how do you want to live your life? Go suffer your pain and come back and tell me what it felt like. And I'll see if I've felt it too. I'm sure I have. I've felt it all. Just stay alive when you make your mistakes. That's the only thing I ask them to do. But in the longer run, we clearly realize that these are only the pains of growing up, and nothing good but good can come from them if we turn more and more to the entire 12 steps for the answer. Now comes the biggest question yet. What about the practice of these principles in all our affairs? Can we love the whole pattern of living as eagerly as we do the small segment of it we discover when we try to help another alcoholic, when we try to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety? Can we bring the same spirit of love and tolerance into our sometimes deranged family lives that we bring to our AA group? That's a good question. Let me read that one again. Can we bring the same spirit of love and tolerance into our sometimes deranged family lives that we bring to our AA group? That was tough. It took a long time but sometimes I can do that one. And my wife appreciates it. Can we have the same kind of confidence and faith in these people who have been infected and sometimes crippled by our own illness that we have in our sponsors? Can we actually carry the AA spirit into our daily work? Can we meet our newly recognized responsibilities to the world at large? And can we bring new purpose and devotion to the religion of our choice? Can we find a new joy of living and trying to do something about all these things? It says, can I learn how to practice these principles in all areas of my life, work, family, and social? You know, that's all I have for those three things. And I've found in my own life that I can't be troubled in one area of my life and happy in the other area of my life. I can't completely compartmentalize my life. If I'm in conflict, I'm in conflict. So I've got to be constantly on guard. How am I practicing these principles at work? How am I practicing them in my home and in my social affairs? Because when one goes out of whack, they all go out of whack. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes in big ways, but out of whack's out of whack. Furthermore, how shall we come to terms with seeming failure or success? And I've often said there's only two things that kill alcoholics, and that's success and failure. How can I come to terms with seeming failure or success? And what that means to me is there's no such thing as failure and success, only things that seem that way to me, or perhaps to other people. But success or failure are both the same. They're learning experiences. And what am I going to learn from them? Can we now accept and adjust to either without despair or pride? Can we accept poverty, sickness, loneliness, and bereavement with courage and serenity? Can we steadfastly content ourselves with the humbler, yet sometimes more durable satisfactions when the brighter, more glittering achievements are denied us? Can I be satisfied with the basics? It doesn't make any difference what I have. If I can't be satisfied with the basics, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to make me happy. The AA answer to these questions about living is yes, all of these things are possible. We know this because we see monotony, pain, and even calamity turned to good use by those who keep on trying, and there's that word again, trying, to practice AA's 12 steps. And if these are facts of life for the many alcoholics who have recovered in AA, they can become the facts of life for many more. Of course, all AAs, even the best, fall far short of such achievements as a consistent thing. Without necessarily taking that first drink, we often get quite far off the beam. Our troubles sometimes begin with indifference. We are sober and happy in our AA work. Things go well at home and office. We naturally congratulate ourselves on what later proves to be a far too easy and superficial point of view. We temporarily cease to grow because we feel satisfied. There is no need for all of AA's 12 steps for us. We are doing fine on a few of them. Maybe we are doing fine on only 2 of them. The first step and that part of the 12th where we carry the message. In AA slang, that blissful state is known as two-stepping, and it can go on for years. The best intentioned of us can fall for the two-step illusion. Sooner or later, the pink clouds stage wears off and things go disappointingly dull. We begin to think that AA doesn't pay off after all. We become puzzled and discouraged. Then perhaps life, as it has a way of doing, suddenly hands us a great big lump that we can't begin to swallow let alone digest. We fail to get a work promotion. We lose that good job. Maybe there are serious domestic or romantic difficulties, or perhaps that boy we thought God was looking after becomes a military casualty. What then? Have we alcoholics in AA got, or can we get, the resources to meet these calamities which come to so many? These were problems of life which we could never face up to. Can we now, with the help of God as we understand Him, handle them as well and as bravely as our non-alcoholic friends often do? Can we transform these calamities into assets, sources of growth, and comfort to ourselves and those about us? Well, we surely have a chance if we switch from two-stepping to 12-stepping. If we are willing to receive that grace of God, which can sustain and strengthen us in any catastrophe. Our basic troubles are the same as everyone else's, but when an honest effort is made to practice these principles in all our affairs, well-grounded AAs seem to have the ability, by God's grace, to take these troubles in stride and turn them into demonstrations of faith. We have seen AAs suffer lingering and fatal illnesses with little complaint and often in good cheer. We have sometimes seen families broken apart by misunderstanding, tensions, or actual infidelity who are reunited by the AA way of life. Though the earning power of most AAs is relatively high, we have some members who never seem to get on their feet money-wise, and still others who encounter heavy financial reverses. Ordinarily, we see these situations met with fortitude and faith. Like most people, we have found that we can take our big lumps as they come. But also, like others, we often discover a greater challenge in the lesser and more continuous problems of life. Our answer is in still more spiritual development. So what it's saying there is that the greater the challenge in our life, the easier it is to deal with it. But what bushwhacks me, and what it's saying bushwhacks us, is that the small challenges are the ones that are the most difficult to deal with, because I don't think I have to do anything. If I have a calamity on my hands, I know I have to take action. If I have a series of little hiccups and mishaps, I can just sweep them under the rug until my rug's got a big mound out in the middle of it. You know, and the coffee table won't sit level on it anymore. So I have to learn to take care of the daily challenges of life and stop ignoring them and start making corrections in me so that they are no longer confronting me on a continuous basis. Our answer lies in still more spiritual development. Only by this means can we improve our chances for really happy and useful living. And as we grow spiritually, we find that our old attitudes toward our instincts need to undergo drastic revisions. Our desires for emotional security and wealth, for personal prestige and power, for romance and for family satisfactions, all these have to be tempered and redirected. We have learned that the satisfaction of instincts cannot be the sole end and aim of our lives. If we place instincts first, we have got the cart before the horse. We shall be pulled backward into disillusionment. But when we are willing to place spiritual growth first, then and only then do we have a real chance. After we come into AA, if we go on growing, our attitudes and actions towards security, emotional security, and financial security commence to change profoundly. Our demand for emotional security for our own way had constantly thrown us into unworkable relations with other people. Though we were sometimes quite unconscious of this, the result always has been the same. Either we had tried to play God and dominate those about us, or we had insisted on being over-dependent on them. Where people had temporarily let us run their lives as though they were still children, we had felt very happy and secure ourselves. But when they finally resisted or ran away, we were bitterly hurt and disappointed. We blamed them, being quite unable to see that our unreasonable demands had been the cause. And this is a restatement of some other things that we've talked about in this step book. When we had taken the opposite tack and had insisted like infants ourselves that people protect and take care of us, or that the world owed us a living, then the result had been equally unfortunate. This often caused the people we had loved most to push us aside or perhaps desert us entirely. Our disillusionment had been hard to bear. We couldn't imagine people acting that way toward us. We had failed to see that though adult in years, we were still behaving childishly, trying to turn everybody, friends, wives, husbands, even the world itself, into protective parents. We had refused to learn the very hard lesson that overdependence upon people is unsuccessful because all people are fallible, and even the best of them will sometimes let us down, especially when our demands for attention become unreasonable.
Take a breath.
Where was I?
Emotional
Oh,
feedback.
as we made, about on page 115, I guess, as we made spiritual progress, we saw through these fallacies. It became clear that here it is, get ready. It became clear that if we were ever to feel emotionally secure among grown-up people, everybody get that one? If I'm ever going to feel emotionally secure among grown, but aren't I going to be? No. There seems to be something broke in my brain. I can learn to live with it, but I ain't going to be one of those people. It became clear that if we were ever to feel emotionally secure among grown-up people, we would have to put our lives on a give-and-take basis. We would have to develop the sense of being in partnership or brotherhood with all those around us. I've got to stop acting like a spoiled child. Damn! After 42 years of screaming and kicking and holding my breath, I got to start acting like a grown-up person. Even though it says I can't become one, I've got to act like one. And I can do that today, sometimes fairly successfully. Not all the time, but I let the kid out to play every once in a while. I let him gallop around and take a look, smell the daisies. We saw that we would need to give constantly of ourselves without demands for repayment, sacrifice. When we persistently did this, we gradually found that people were attracted to us as never before. And even if they failed us, we could be understanding and not too seriously affected. When we developed still more, we discovered the best possible source of emotional stability to be God Himself. We found that dependence upon His perfect justice, forgiveness, and love was healthy, and that it would work where nothing else would. If we really depended upon God, we couldn't very well play God to our fellows, nor would we feel the urge wholly to rely on human protection and care. These were the new attitudes that finally brought many of us an inner strength and peace that could not be deeply shaken by the shortcomings of others or by any calamity not of our own making. So that thing I was talking to about a couple of weeks ago, the clock and the thunderstorm, just keeps ticking like wasn't anything going on. You know, that's who I want to be. I want to be the same person regardless of what's going on around me. I want to be a person that loves other human beings. I want to be a person that gives understanding and cares about other people's welfare. You know, I don't care what's happening to me so much as I care about what's happening to other people. This new outlook was we learned something especially necessary to us alcoholics. For alcoholism had been a lonely business even though we had been surrounded by people who loved us. But when self-will had driven everybody away and our isolation had become complete, it caused us to play the big shot, and I had better pick up the speed here. It caused us to play the big shot in cheap bar rooms and then fare forth alone on the street to depend upon the charity of passers-by. We were still trying to find emotional security by being dominating or dependent upon others, even when our fortunes had not ebbed that much, and we nevertheless found ourselves alone in the world. We still vainly tried to be secure by some unhealthy kind of domination or dependence. For those of us who were like that, AA had a very special meaning. Through it, we begin to learn right relations with people who understand us. We don't have to be alone anymore. And that's why it's so important not to get disconnected with this fellowship. It says, through it, I begin to learn right relations with people who understand me. I can come here and practice these things and have them practiced on me. And then one day I can go out in the street and act like a grown-up person and start getting different results. But I've got to practice first, and this is where I have to come to practice, and this is where I have to come to stay in practice. You know, Magic Johnson's making $100 million a month or something like that, and he went to basketball practice every day. He didn't have a game. You know, he still had to practice. Most married folks in AA have very happy homes. To a surprising extent, AA has offset the damage to family life brought about by years of alcoholism. Just like all other societies, we do have sex and marital problems, and sometimes they are distressingly acute. Permanent marriage breakups and separations, however, are unusual in AA. Our main problem is not how we are to stay married. It is how to be more happily married by eliminating the severe emotional twists that have so often stemmed from alcoholism. And that was what I was faced with in my own marriage. I married a girl that there wasn't absolutely anything wrong with her, but when I got through with her, she wasn't worth shooting. So not only did I have to work on myself, I had to wait for the changes to take place in her as I was changing. I have the ability to change other people by changing myself. Just by taking different actions, other people start acting different. So I start to get different results. And I have to be patient to let those changes start to happen in other people, because they'll still think I'm playing the same old game, even though I'm not saying the same thing. And I'll say, hi, it's a nice day, and they say, go to hell, just like yesterday. And I say, but I said it's a nice day, go to hell. And one day she'll say, yeah, it is a nice day. I didn't think you'd ever notice. You're so negative all the time. And I want to say, listen here, you bitch. I've been saying it's a nice day for the last week. But I had to learn how not to do that. And finally, I was able to eliminate some of these emotional twists that were in my family life. I was married 4 years, thinking the only way to solve it was to get divorced. But it told me that most AAs have happy marriages if they'll but work on them. And mine ain't made in heaven, and there isn't a thing about it that I wouldn't change if I could. But it's mine, and it's okay, and I like it, and I'm going to stay in it. Nearly every sound human being experiences at some time in life a compelling desire to find a mate of the opposite sex with whom the fullest possible union can be made. Here comes the proper order. It is in this order for a reason. Spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. The fullest possible union. Spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. And we talked about how to form on a very basic basis on how to form a loving relationship, the stages that you go through. And these are the things that you start to need to look at as for compatibility with another potential mate or someone you want to have a loving relationship with. Are these things going to, am I going to complement this in him, and is he going to complement this in me, or vice versa? How are all these things going to fit together? And that's why, I talked about it's important not to jump into bed the first thing, because then you're in the physical, and that's the fourth thing on the list. And once you get sex involved, then all kinds of complications take place because these other things haven't been straightened out yet, and that sometimes it becomes possible to back up and straighten them out. Spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. This mighty energy that deeply influences our lives. Wait a minute. What? This mighty urge is the root of great human accomplishments, a creative energy that deeply influences our lives. God fashioned us that way. So our question will be this: how by ignorance, compulsion, and self-will do we misuse this gift for our own destruction? Okay, so ignorance, compulsion, and self-will will put me in reverse order on this list real quick. And I'll say, I'll just think I'm doing fine until things go sour. And then I have to blame somebody because I didn't make any mistakes. But really what I've done is destroy a part of my life and helped another human being do the same. We AAs cannot pretend to offer full answers to age-old perplexities, but our own experience does provide certain answers that work for us. When alcoholism strikes, very unnatural situations may develop which work against marriage partnership and compatible union. If the man is affected, the wife must become the head of the house, often the breadwinner. As matters get worse, the husband becomes a sick and irresponsible child who needs to be looked after and extricated from endless scrapes and impasses. Very gradually, and sometimes without any realization of the fact, the wife is forced to become the mother of an erring boy. And if she had a strong maternal instinct to begin with, the situation is aggravated. Yes, it is. Obviously, not much partnership can exist under these conditions. The wife usually goes on doing the best she knows how, but meanwhile, the alcoholic alternately loves and hates her maternal care. A pattern is thereby established that may take a lot of undoing later on. Nevertheless, under the influence of AA's 12 steps, these situations are often set right. And this is written in the masculine, but I don't want you women to feel left out. You put in the right pronouns here and the right nouns to fit your case. When the distortion has been great, however, A long period of patient striving may be necessary. After the husband joins AA, the wife may become discontented. She did. Even highly resentful that Alcoholics Anonymous has done the very thing that all her years of devotion had failed to do. She did. Her husband may become so wrapped up in AA and his new friends that he is inconsiderately away from home more than when he drank. He did. Seeing her unhappiness, he recommends A's 12 steps and tries to teach her how to live. I did. She naturally feels that for years she has made a far better job of living than he has. She did. Most of them blame each other. Both of them blame each other. We did. And asked when their marriage is ever going to be happy again. We said never. They may even begin to suspect it had never been any good in the first place. It wasn't. Compatibility, of course, can be so impossibly damaged that a separation may be necessary. It wasn't. But those cases are the unusual ones. The alcoholic realizing what his wife has endured and not fully understanding how much he himself did to damage her and his children nearly always takes up his marriage responsibilities with a willingness to repair what he can and to accept what he can't. I had to accept the things that I really didn't like, but they're okay. I caused them, so I'm willing to suffer the consequences of my actions. He persistently tries all of AA's 12 steps in his home, often with fine results. At this point, he firmly but lovingly commences to behave like a partner instead of like a bad boy. And above all, he is finally convinced that reckless romancing is not a way of life for him. AA has many single alcoholics who wish to marry are in a position to do so. Some marry fellow AAs. How do they come out? On the whole, these marriages are very good ones. Their common suffering as drinkers, their common interest in AA and spiritual things often enhance such unions. Caution. It is only where boy meets girl on AA campus and love follows at first sight that difficulties may develop. Not may, they generally do. The prospective partners need to be solid AAs and long enough acquainted to know that their compatibility at spiritual, mental, and emotional levels is a fact and not wishful thinking. They need to be as sure as possible that no deep-lying emotional handicap in either will be likely to rise up under later pressure to cripple them. The considerations are equally true and important for the AAs who marry outside AA. With clear understanding and right, grown-up attitudes, very happy results do follow. And what can be said of many AA members who, for a variety of reasons, cannot have a family life? At first, many of these feel lonely, hurt, and left out as they witness so much domestic happiness about them. If they cannot have this kind of happiness, can AA offer them satisfaction of similar worth and durability? Yes, whenever they try hard to seek them out. Surrounded by so many AA friends, these so-called loners tell us they no longer feel alone. In partnership with others, men and women, they can devote themselves to any number of ideas, people, and constructive projects. Free of marital responsibilities, they can participate in enterprises which would be denied to family men and women. We daily see such members rendered prodigies of service and receive great joys in return. And I talked a little bit last week about this part of it in the 12th step about the proper attitude towards work, and here it comes. Where the possession of money and material things was concerned, our outlook underwent the same revolutionary change. With a few exceptions, all of us had been spendthrifts. We threw money about in every direction with the purpose of pleasing ourselves and impressing other people. In our drinking time, we acted as if the money supply was inexhaustible though between binges we'd sometimes go to the other extreme and become almost miserly. Without realizing it, we were just accumulating funds for the next spree. Money was the symbol of pleasure and self-importance. When our drinking had become much worse, money was only an urgent requirement which could supply us with the next drink and the temporary comfort of oblivion it brought. Upon entering AA, these attitudes were sharply reversed, often going much too far in the opposite direction. The spectacle of years of waste threw us into panic. There simply wouldn't be time, we thought, to rebuild our shattered fortunes. How could we ever take care of those awful debts, possess a decent home, educate the kids, and set something by for old age? Financial importance was no longer a principal aim. We now clamored for material security. Even when we were well reestablished in our business, these terrible fears often continued to haunt us. This made us misers and penny pinchers all over again. Complete financial security we must have, or else. We forgot that most alcoholics in AA have an earning power considerably above average. We forgot the immense goodwill of our brother AAs, who were only too eager to help us to better jobs when we deserved them. We forgot the actual or potential financial insecurity of every human being in the world. And worst of all, we forgot God. In money matters, we had faith only in ourselves, and not too much of that. This all meant, of course, that we were still far off balance. When a job still looked like a mere means of getting money rather than an opportunity for service, when the acquisition of money for financial independence looked more important than a right dependence upon God, we were still the victims of unreasonable fears. And these were fears which would make a serene and useful existence at any financial level quite impossible. So, in the promises, it says that we will lose our fear of financial insecurity. And the joke is we'll lose our fear of it, but we won't lose our financial insecurity, you know. But if I don't deal with money matters with the right dependence on God, then it doesn't make any difference how much money I have. It is absolutely never enough. And when it is never enough, then I start making demands. And when I start making demands, bad things happen. I'm back into living my life on the basis of unsatisfied demands. And when I'm not getting my demands met, I lose my gratitude. And when I lose my gratitude, my humility left about 5 minutes before so bad things start to happen to me. And I talked about this last week, and I kind of went off on the deep end. And so I won't spend too much time on it tonight. But as time passed, we found that with the help of AA's 12 steps, we could lose those fears no matter what our material prospects were. We could cheerfully perform humble labor without worrying about tomorrow. If our circumstances happened to be good, we no longer dreaded a change for the worse, for we had learned that these troubles could be turned into great value. It did not matter too much what our material condition was, but it did matter what our spiritual condition was. Well, it says in the 6th chapter of Matthew, in verse 33, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And if you'd like to read the whole thing, it begins at verse 24 and goes through verse 34. But what Bill's telling us here and what Matthew was saying Jesus was telling us, and I don't mean to wax religious, it's just that this kind of put it in perspective for me, is that if I'll try to do the right thing, I will never be short of money to fill the needs that I may have, whatever those needs may be. They may be great, they may be small, but I will have the money to fill those needs if I'll just try to do the right thing. Notice I didn't say anything about wants, needs. I've always had all the money I needed. drunk or sober, whether I knew that there was a God or didn't know that there was a God, I always had all the money I needed. And I don't even know where it came from. If I always had money for rent, for car payment, for the utilities and all that, those mundane matters. And I didn't even work. And all the bills still got paid. I can't, to this day, I can't figure out where the money came from. I didn't even file tax returns. I don't know. It just showed up. Now, if he'll do that for me dead drunk, what's he going to do for me if I just try? And I haven't. I just had to stop or learn how to stop worrying about where the money was going to come from. It was going to show up. I don't know from which direction. It'll just show up if I try to do the right thing. Let's here take note of our improved outlook upon the problems of personal importance, power, ambition, and leadership. These were reefs upon which many of us came to shipwreck during our drinking careers. Practically every boy in the United States dreams of becoming our president. He wants to be his country's #1 man. As he gets older and sees the impossibility of this, he can smile good-naturedly at his childhood dream. In later life, he finds that real happiness is not to be found in just trying to be a #1 man or even a first-rater in the heartbreaking struggle for money, romance, or self-importance. He learns that he can be content as long as he plays well whatever cards life deals him. He's still ambitious, but not absurdly so, because he can now see and accept actual reality. He's willing to stay right size. But not so with alcoholics. When AA was quite young, a number of eminent psychologists and doctors made an exhaustive study, and remember that word, an exhaustive study, of a good-sized group of so-called problem drinkers. The doctors weren't trying to find out how different we were from one another. They sought to find out whatever personality traits, if any, this group of alcoholics had in common. They came up with a conclusion that shocked the AA members of that time, and remember this was an exhaustive study. These distinguished men had the nerve to say that most of the alcoholics under investigation were childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. I don't know why they put in the word most of the alcoholics under it. All of the alcoholics under investigation were childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. And that's me. I wanted to be the spoiled little boy who could not tolerate constructive criticism, direction, instruction, discipline. And I thought I was something that I wasn't. How we alcoholics did resent that verdict. We would not believe that our adult dreams were often truly childish. And considering the rough deal life had given us, we felt it perfectly natural that we were sensitive. As to our grandiose behavior, we insisted that we had been possessed of nothing but a high and legitimate ambition to win the battle of life. In the years since, however, most of us have come to agree with those doctors. We have had a much keener look at ourselves and those about us. We have seen that we were prodded by unreasonable fears or anxieties into making a life business of winning fame, money, and what we thought was leadership. So false pride became the reverse side of that ruinous coin marked fear. We simply had to be #1 people to cover up our deep-lying inferiorities. Our fitful successes we boast, in fitful successes we boasted of greater feats to be done. In defeat we were bitter. If we didn't have much of any worldly success, we became depressed and cowed. Then people said we were of the inferior type. But now we see ourselves as chips off the same old block. At heart, we had all been abnormally fearful. It mattered little whether we had sat on the shore of life drinking ourselves into forgetfulness or had plunged in recklessly and willfully beyond our depth and ability. The result was the same. All of us had nearly perished in a sea of alcohol. But today, in well-matured AAs, these distorted drives have been restored to something like their true purpose and direction. We no longer strive to dominate or rule those about us in order to gain self-importance. We no longer seek fame and honor in order to be praised. When by devoted service to family, friends, business, or community, we attract widespread affection or sometimes singled out for posts of greater responsibility and trust, we try to be humbly grateful and exert ourselves the more in a spirit of love and service. True leadership, we find, depends upon able example and not upon vain displays of power and glory. Still more wonderful is the feeling that we do not have to be specially distinguished among our fellows in order to be useful and profoundly happy. Not many of us can be leaders of prominence, nor do we wish to be. Service gladly rendered, obligations squarely met, troubles well accepted or solved with God's help, the knowledge that at home or in the world outside we are partners in a common effort, the well understood fact that in God's sight all human beings are important, the proof that love freely given surely brings a full return, the certainty that we are no longer isolated and alone in self-constructed prisons, the surety that we need no longer be square pegs in round holes, but can fit and belong in God's scheme of things. These are the permanent and legitimate satisfactions of right living, for which no amount of pomp and circumstance, no heap of material possessions could possibly be substitutes. And I'm going to take the time tonight, but why don't you, at your convenience, go back and reread that big long sentence and digest it. True ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is the deep desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. These little studies of AA's 12 steps now come to a close. We have been considering so many problems that it may appear that AA consists mainly of racking dilemmas and troubleshooting. Well, it pretty much has for me. To a certain extent, that is true. We have been talking about problems because we are problem people who have found a way up and out and who wish to share our knowledge of that way with all who can use it. For it is only by accepting and solving our problems that we can begin to get right with ourselves and with the world about us and with Him who presides over us all. Understanding is the key to right principles and attitudes, and right action is the key to good living. Therefore, the joy of good living is the theme of AA's 12 steps. With each passing day of our lives, may every one of us sense more deeply the inner meaning of AA's simple prayer. Let's read it. God grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks a lot.